go, guys. This is Christmas, and it's welcome to the Top Lines and Tails weekly livestock podcast coming to you from Christmas time. And I've got some of my mates in here this year, and we're going to have a bit of a lively podcast chatting about various things, and it's all about livestock, loosely anyway. And going to start with, I've got my bar humbug friend, Derek Redpath. Derek, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
And I got straight off the Christmas tree, it's Golden Bulls, Andrew Goldie himself there. Bring it on, Andrew.
Good to be here, long time listener, first time caller.
Okay, and as they say in Spain, us sheep guys, Feliz Navidad. Here we go, we got another sheep boy on there, Scott Brown, a regular, and Scotty, bring us some crack.
Hey boys, how you getting on?
So I'm not quite sure where we're going to start this one, and anybody got a Christmas joke for us?
I just opened my first Christmas cracker today, and what does Santa suffer from when he gets stuck in the chimney?
Go on.
Claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia. That might be funny in about 2 hours' time, but at the moment it's kind of fell on a bit of a snowy ground down there.
That's a right shit dad joke that Derek will get a lot more than we will.
What do we call a cross between a cow and an earthquake?
I don't know.
A milkshake. Come on, guys, get with the program here.
Milkshake.
Right. And why do cows have hooves instead of feet? One for you, Andrew.
They've got what? They've got.
Why do cows have hooves instead of feet?
Oh, I don't know. You tell me, Andy.
Because they lack toes.
Oh, very good.
See, that's one. That didn't make it to the Christmas cracker list this year. It probably... I
can understand why.
It's in the background for next year's Christmas cracker jokes. After that, I've kind of run out of jokes here, really.
Thank God for that.
Right, well... Our listeners out there, thousands of you, thank you very much. It's another year gone by. We're moving into our third year now on Top Lines and Tails, and thank you all for tuning in for our 109th episode, I think we're at there. And firstly, we'd like to say at our episode, we'd like to do a little bit of rest in peace, a few people that we've lost this year. We are a livestock podcast, and there's a few people in the livestock industry that we have lost this year that we maybe should give a mention. So, well, the one at the top of my list, and probably one of the greatest cattle breeders of our generation and the generation before us, really, which spans quite a time between us and the generation before that's probably written almost 3 generations on here if we take in the Ben of Andrew in the bottom corner of my video screen there. But if we take the 3 generations, one of the greatest cattle breeders and a man who's done a fantastic amount for the industry, and particularly the Aberdeen Angus industry, would be William McLaren. And William McLaren of Netherton, to those guys that don't know, who would won the Sir William Young Award. And we did a podcast on Willie a few months ago, so you guys will be aware of him. But William McLaren Senior, should I say, a man who stuck by the Angus breed when everybody else was running away in different directions, and between him and 2 or 3 other guys made the breed really happen. And I think everybody that breeds Angus cattle in the UK and possibly around the world will owe a huge debt of gratitude to the man William McLaren. Scotty, did you know him?
I met Willie a couple of times, yeah. Privileged to meet him. Very distinguished man, very knowledgeable in the Angus, household name really, I suppose, in the Angus breed. The Netherton herd name, known well at far and wide. A bit of a legend has passed on. I suppose young Willie, the work will be getting carried on by him now. But what an amazing memory to leave behind you in terms of his achievements within the Angus breed. And you're right, to his credit, he stuck by the Angus breed when the old traffic was running in towards the Continentals in the 70s when they came in. Willie was relentless in his pursuit of maintaining the Angus breed within the UK beef herds and keeping the Anguses at the top. And but one of those guys has been at the top, been at the top or thereabout, had so much influence within the Angus breed, more than many folk, I suppose, you could think of over that length of time. Andy, you just said 3 generations, I think. Surely. That'd probably be about right.
Surely, and a man who stuck with commercial values, and Willie had sat and told me that many times, commercial values in an Angus breed when other people were chasing fads, and I think that's where the credit came to him, and he realised when the breed was going the wrong way, it lost its commercial value, and he made sure that he tried to fetch that commercial value back, and that's a lesson we can all learn there, Derek, isn't it?
It certainly is. I only met the great man once that I can recall, and that was a young farmer's stock judging practice for the Highland Show, and we were there. And I was just a young whippersnapper at the time, but you were just in awe the man's knowledge, and the cattle were just superb. And, you know, that could be, showing my age, 32 years ago maybe, and you still remember it to this day. So that's the kind of fella he was, really. It stuck in your mind. The cattle were just fantastic.
Certainly, and a man who encouraged youngsters every day of his life and just made sure that everybody else got a listen and got a turn. And I certainly had that when going to the shows with him as well. As a youngster, he would encourage everybody. Andrew, you probably wouldn't remember it, maybe before your day, but did you come across McLaren on your travels?
I certainly didn't come across him on a personal level, but I've certainly saw within the Angus breed there's a lot of Netherton mentioned within the whole herd book. He's had a massive impact on what the Aberdeen Angus are today. I just think if you look through any herd, there'll be very few herds that don't have Netherton breeding throughout it, one way or another.
We'll miss old Willie, and as I said, we've done a podcast on him. Another man we've done a podcast on this year, and we might come on to this a little bit later from the auctioneers, but it was Rowley Fraser. I'd probably say the great Rowley Fraser as well, from a fantastic firm of McDonald Fraser, of course, in Perth, auctioneers. And Andrew, you're an auctioneer, but you won't have learned from Rowley, but you'll learn from people who learned from people who learned from Rowley. He's a man that went back a long way, and it's sadly missed too.
Yeah, I've heard many people speaking about Rowley, and there's a huge influence throughout the whole auctioneering industry. I mean, myself, just been a retired auctioneer at 32, I still know what was going on in the background with it all, and if you spoke to anyone, they always went back to some of the greats back in the day, and Rowley Fraser was certainly one that got mentioned a lot for his character in the box and the way he sold. And if you look through the industry as a whole at the moment, it would be there's a lot of auctioneers coming forward that can certainly learn a lot from the characters like Rowley and that are coming through from that era.
As I said, we'll go on to the auctioneers a little bit later on in this recording, but it's both of you boys there in the borders, Scotty and Derek, you'll have had dealings with, everybody's had dealings with Rowley, surely.
I can't actually remember. I've never met Rowley, but I mean, his name is synonymous with, you know, a long time respected auctioneer who was well known and, as I say, respected within the industry. So yeah, I'm sure he's a great loss.
Yeah, I was the same. It wasn't a man that I ever came across, but I knew him by reputation. A big name and a big character.
Yeah, indeed, it's a big loss, and a man got to a good age, and I was fortunate enough. I sat and had a couple of hours recording with him, close on 10 years ago now, and a man taught me more about the Aberdeen Angus cattle than anybody else has ever taught me, including, well, the two men I've mentioned, Willie McLaren and Rowley Fraser. I think probably knew more about the Angus breed than all everybody else put together, really. So, a sad loss. I'm going to mention that one friend of mine, Gary Owen, you guys won't know, you might think of him as the man that put up and under in the rugby, but Gary was a pal of mine, bred Oxford sheep, but he bred Murray Grey cattle and started bringing cattle to Smithfield in the 1970s, and it brought animals down there, never even seen a shear, barely seen a halter, barely seen anything, and Gary cemented himself. He decided if he was going to go showing cattle, he thought the best place to go was the Royal Smithfield show, so he turned up with these things covered in shite, complete mess, and then he came to me, could I give him a hand to sort him out, which was a bit of a challenge, and Gary and I became pals, and I lost Gary early on this year. You guys, anybody else you want to mention on that one?
There was a very old friend of mine. I say old, I don't know what age she would be when she passed away there, but not long ago was Betty Wilson from Ayrshire. She was married to Andy Wilson, the Cairnview herd, Simmental herd in Ayrshire. She was very well respected and known throughout the whole Simmental society, and she'll be a huge miss to everyone there. So. Yep. I definitely couldn't leave her out today, but no, as I say, it's quite hard to try and remember back throughout these last few years now, but yeah, she's definitely one that I'd like to mention now.
Yeah, Robert McInnes from Grassyards in Ayrshire, and Robert was a great family friend of Anne, my wife's, and they knew the family much better than I did, but I only knew Robert maybe for the last 15 years, but by all accounts, the Holstein herd that he dispersed a number of years ago were absolutely outstanding. Of their day, they would be one of the best herds in Scotland. And unfortunately, Robert passed away this year after a fight with Parkinson's, among other things. And he was a character and a fantastic stockman. And when he gave up his Holsteins, he moved on to Blackies of all things and Blueface Leicesters. And because he was a natural stockman, he made a hell of a good job of both of them. And just a downright nice fella and a lot of fun. A real proper character, and he'll be sadly missed. And another guy locally that a lot you guys maybe won't know, but he was a legend in his day among blackface sheep, was Selby Wilson. And Selby was in his heyday at Tollis Hill, when Tollis Hill was at the top of the tree, in the days when Connaughton bought their tups from Tollis Hill, and Selby was at the heart of the team there. And he was a real old school. Selby was in his 90s when he died, and smashing fella. He lived locally around here. His family all still live locally. And when we moved down here, the first year we were at Pennymuir Show, I hadn't really had much to do with Selby, but I'd heard of him. And you never meet a nicer guy, and he was really, really encouraging to young folk within the breed, and an absolute master and a knowledge among them all his life. So he was a smashing fella.
That's fantastic to hear, isn't it? And when we get old folk or older folk like that, Chris, we're all getting on now apart from Andrew, but older folk like that will pass that knowledge on to the youngsters and make a passion and make an effort to do that. I think it's we can get old grumpy bastards, as we can all. Andrew's probably a grumpy bastard as well. He's not as old, but we can all get on and be older grumpy bastards. But it's about making the effort to pass that knowledge on to the youngsters. And when you say somebody as qualified as that, Derek, in amongst the Blackie breed, and I probably should have introduced you at the top of the show, really, as Derek, of course, you are a Blackie breeder of some ilk yourself and very much involved in that breed. And maybe we'll come on to your prowess in that in a second. What about you, Brownie? Is there anybody there that's gone missing out of the business in your end?
I suppose the most obvious one I can think of is just recently was the passing of Doddie Weir. I think we're going to come on to that in a minute.
We will. Another man I want to mention, and I'm not sure if you guys will have come across this, was Ian Grant, and Sir Ian Grant as he became. And Ian, a fantastic man, and I will do a podcast on him one of the days, because a man just highly respected within the agricultural industry, and his father, Alan Grant at the Thorn, fantastic Aberdeen Angus breeder in his day, and sort of Ian stepped away from the farming and made his way by being chairman of this, that and the other, including the Scottish Tourist Board and the Castle of May Trust later on in his days. And my association with Ian was when I first started showing at Smithfield Show. He was the steward and then the chief steward, and then when I became one of the stewards at the Royal Smithfield Show there down in London, Ian was no longer an official, but Ian was always about there in the ring himself, and Jim Stobo and Donald Bigger for that matter as well, who's sadly gone too. But Ian was always about there, and if there was a stooshy or anything going on, he was a man. I've never seen a man level a situation so easily by saying very little but doing things right, and I think I would say him and Donald Bigger were cut from the same cloth when it came to that. So a big loss, Sir Ian, this year, and it's only quite recently as well. So respects to his family.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. You're right. I mean, they broke the mould when they made Ian, and he was very well respected. He was, and my goodness, he was a great statesman of Scottish agriculture, and we could really do with somebody like him right now. I've never seen us so bereft of leaders in the industry at the moment as we are, and we could really do with an Ian Grant. Could do with him being cloned. Hell of a nice man as well, as you just mentioned too. Great way with him, lovely man, and sadly will be missed going forward. I don't know what age Ian would he be 81 when he passed away? He was 81, yeah. Met Ian quite a few times, most of which at the Highland Show. He's very friendly with my mum and my stepdad David. Hell of a nice man, as I said, but great shame. But as I say, all good things come to an end at some stage, but Ian will have left a great legacy behind in what he's achieved, represented, and stood for in Scottish agriculture in his time.
These kind of guys that we're talking about, like that are leave a legacy. They've earned it. Like they've cut their teeth in the agriculture business. It doesn't matter what
Yeah.
line of stock, and they've earned the respect because they were so phenomenally good at what they did, and that's where we get these characters and these leaders from. They're, you know, as you said, Scott, they broke the mould when they make these kind of guys, and there is a shortage of them, right enough. But the respect these guys get, it's all absolutely earned and absolutely deserved.
And the effort that they put in as well, that's the thing. And a lot of these efforts, as we all know, all four of us now get involved in various things, not least the Royal Highland Show that we all put a little bit of time into as well. A lot of these things unsung. We don't do it for the money. There's no money involved in a lot of these things. And you think when you are an ambassador for the industry, people think, well, look, you're there, you're earning this and earning that. And very often there's no payback on that apart from just your name in the paper or somebody respecting what you say. So it is. We've all sat on councils, and I know we all probably still do sit on councils as well. We have a day job, but we have a duty to put a bit back, and that comes back without any financial recompense at all.
Yeah, these kind of people are few and far between now, Andy. There's less and less people now want to. I suppose less and less people. More people have got less time than they ever had before. There's less people working on farms. Those who are working on farms, their days a lot fuller than it used to be. You know, and they wish there was an 8th day in the week now. And I think, whilst there's maybe a lot of people who would love to be helping out and doing the kind of things that perhaps you just mentioned that we do, or any other voluntary role which helps to further a cause, there's just not the time on farms these days for people to go and do that, and that's only going to get worse. That's not going to get better, unfortunately.
Sure, and as you said, these people who have an advantage, and some of those have an advantage where they're inherited into bigger estates and farms and what have you, and spend their time putting that back in, or they earn their living in another way. And I mean, there's people. I've got a neighbour, John Cameron, up the road from Balboothie. You guys will know, another legend in the business, and earned his money. And John's still gladly with us at the moment, but earned their money in many other ways, but put their effort back into trying to further the agriculture industry from out with the industry. And I think that's it's a pleasure to have those guys in there, and it's a shame when we lose them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to one more recently, and a sad loss, and that's Neil Robertson from the Scottish Farmer, and we'll all know Neil from the crack that he'd always give, the fun we'd always have, and him and Fletch and John Fraser around there were always just a pleasure to go to any show anywhere, and he'd have a joke to tell and a leg to pull, and you guys all know him.
Yeah, he certainly kept a lot of people right around the market. If you saw him going about getting his pictures, taking the pictures, he was definitely the man that was shouting and roaring at all the boys to keep them right. But he was some man. He's a huge character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was, Andy. You're right. Hell of a nice man. And wouldn't you just love to have been a fly in the wall in the Scottish Farmer days and the golden days of the Scottish Farmer? When not to say that they're not golden days now. Ken Fletcher, if you're listening.
Scotty, maybe.
There's my subscription gone.
Just leave it Andy.
Can you imagine just being in the company of John Fraser and Neil and Ken in the show days, even at Smithfield and times like that? I mean, just legendary crack, great fun, and so accomplished at his job as well. Neil, he always got the best out of his subjects because he was just such a cheery character, and he always did everything with a kind of cheeky smile. You know, he's a great lad, super bloke.
Aye, I've no lot to add to that. He's just an absolute topper. You remember him even at Young Farmers Conferences. He used to come to them and cause mayhem and take photos and all the rest of it. And of all the...
You'll be glad some of them didn't see the light of day.
Not all the after party stuff, just the official stuff, and then he would get involved.
I was going to ask that. Did you have to get the lawyers involved in that?
I was going to say there must be. Does anybody know where he's kept his negatives there? That's probably something we should ask him.
The big
Ken Fletcher will have them somehow. He'll be leaking them out slowly through the year next year, likely.
Fletcher will keep those for insurance, I tell you, because he'll probably be someone him as well.
Hey, Goldie, I think if the money's right, you'll get them.
Oh, definitely. Hey, if the money's right with anything, surely, Scott.
Well, Goldie, you're the nearest. Fletcher's just up the road from you, so if you see him over Christmas, any negatives on anything on any of us, we'll give him money for him. He's got his
easy with the budget, mind, Goldie.
I need to sort him out anyway, because I'm still trying to sort him out for the misprint in my wedding photo that he put at the Scottish Farmer yet. So
what did he say?
He's keeping. Oh, don't worry, he's keeping out my way. I'll keep that one for a later date.
Well, did he say you were previously married?
No.
Still married.
Aye, that's the problem.
He didn't say he used to be a hooker by any chance, did he?
Aye.
Funny story. I actually used to be a hooker in my rugby days. Actually, so it would have been factually correct.
There you go. There you go. Well, we're on the subject of hookers, and of course, moves us on to rugby players. And Scott mentioned it just briefly just now. Well, let's talk about the great giraffe that was Doddie Weir, and a man all of us have rubbed shoulders with. Although I've never rubbed his shoulder, but twice the height of me, and twice the height of all of us, I would say. And the giraffe that he was, and a fantastic man, and a farmer in the Borders, and I think Derek, he'd probably be a neighbour with you, would he, down that way there, and a man you'd know quite well.
Yeah, when I was at Puntaton, his family lived just right across the valley, and super family, just a typical Borders family farming business, and just good crack, all of them, you know. But Doddie, I mean, where do you start? There's been so much in the media about it, and all of it's true. I mean, the one that sticks in your mind is that when he came into a room, he just lit it up, and it's true. His company was infectious. His smile was infectious, and his attitude to life was just amazing.
Yeah, you guys will know him better than me, and as I mentioned, rugby, we'll go on to rugby players. There's a bit of rugby in your family as well, but Scotty, again, a big rugby man there, and a Borders man as well. You the same thing, you'd have been a lot of respect.
Yeah, massive, Andy. I ended up going down to his memorial service on Monday, and I think the atmosphere was one of a very celebratory atmosphere. I suppose Doddie, in his own words, had said he had lived through the unique circumstances of all the dinners he was going to. He very much viewed that as that was his wake. He was living through his wake for the last year and a half, going to dinners and stuff to raise money, and he absolutely loved it all. And I suppose Monday, as sad as it was, the poor fella's no longer with us. It was a great celebration of his life and the legacy he's left behind with his fundraising for M&D, and just everybody had a good story. He's one of these guys. Everybody had a good story a good experience of Doddie's times. I mean, listening to Jim Telfer in the SRU podcast last week, he was talking about an old lady that lived in Hawick had said she only met Doddie once about 10 years ago, and she was just instantly taken by the impression that he left behind, and has followed him all the way through his journey of M&D, and you know, he just seemed to pick people up and take him along on his journey. He was just that sort of infectious kind of personality. His wife, Kath, described him in the papers as an incredible force of nature, which is pretty much what he was. John Jeffries described him in his eulogy as a pest. He was a pest on the pitch. He was a pest off the pitch. And he was because he was a pest in life, generally speaking. He made great inroads with the scientists and doctors looking to push the science around the corner. Doddie refused to accept that M&D was an incurable condition, and to that end, his legacy was that he wanted to make sure that he said that M&D is not incurable. It's just a disease we haven't found a cure for yet. And he was in his pursuits. He was relentless in his pursuits to make sure that the funding was in place, if not for him, and as it turned out, it wasn't in time for Doddie, but for people coming along the line after Doddie, that their fate hopefully would be different to Doddie's as a result of the science and the research that would go into the disease as a result of his fundraising efforts. But I remember distinctly when there was a fundraising game in Melrose for Doddie, which I played in at the age of 50, which I should have known better with. I was playing with his brother Tom, who I'm actually really good pals with, and in that particular game, I tore my hamstring really badly, almost off my backside, and the pain was excruciating. And Tom broke his ribs, and whilst Tom was rolling about in the waiting room in the BGH at 10 o'clock at night, I was at home trying to get comfortable with poking pillows in various positions to try and ease the pain in my torn hamstring. And I got a text message from Tom, "Are you comfortable yet?" And I said, "No, how are you?" He says, "Haven't been seen yet. Mind you, I'm not sure what they're going to do." Anyway, fast forward a couple of weeks, I was judging Suffolk's in Northumberland show, which at that point in time I thought I'd never be able to do. And we're walking along the alleyways past the trade stands, and here's Doddie's there with his Hutchison drainage trade stand. And Jane was a little bit in front of me, obviously, because she was able to walk better. And I got a text message from Tom, "Are you comfortable yet?" And I said, "No, how are you?" He says, "Haven't been seen yet. Mind you, I'm not sure what they're going to do." And we're walking along the alleyways past the trade stands, and here's Doddie's there with his Hutchison drainage trade stand. And Jane was a little bit in front of me, obviously, because she was able to walk better. And he goes, "Oh, Jane, it's yourself." And then I thought, "Oh, this will be good." And I walked along, and he gave Jane a big hug and welcomed her like a long lost friend. And he said, "And you?" He goes, "You, my brother, you should know bloody better." He said, "Playing rugby at your age," he said, "you need to have a word with yourself." I said, "Oh, no problem, Doddie. You're welcome, by the way." And he goes, No. He goes, "You need to stop that nonsense. It's bloody silly." So you got all your thanks in one day, but that was just Doddie, just a great character, just nice guy, great man, lost, a massive ambassador for the Borders of Scotland, for Scottish rugby, for M&D, the whole 9 years, an all-round good guy, and will be sadly missed.
Absolutely well said, Scotty. I knew you would have known him more than most in Scottish rugby. He'd be similar age, I guess. Would you be? No, he'd be a bit older than you, would he?
Thanks, Andy. No, he's actually 2 years younger.
And 2 foot taller.
Yeah. But an amazing guy, super blown, just as Derek said, great neighbours to have, lovely family, the whole family are lovely. He'll be a great miss.
And you're absolutely right, and I'm sure Andrew will endorse as well, and Andrew will be a rugby fan the same as the rest of us. But we talk about guys involved in rugby. I know we've just gone through a Football World Cup, and it was great entertainment, but I mean, we're all, 4 of us, involved and enjoy our rugby days, and rugby seems to have some sort of synonymous with the farming business. There's been a lot of great farmers that have played rugby and then gone back about their business into farming after that, Doddie being one of them, and there's a few more on the board, as you mentioned, JJ, of course, John Jeffries from Kelso there, the White Shark, who we know him, and I knew JJ, and John and I have had some chat over the years, and a fantastic family there, Jeffries, and again, Derek would be somebody you'd know quite well.
Yeah, JJ's actually... I went from being Doddie's neighbour to almost being JJ's neighbour. They're on the same estate. It's a slightly different kind of farm, but they're on the same estate, and we have an annual gathering for the estate rent lunch, and JJ's usually there, and you get a bit of crack with him. And his late father Jimmy was absolutely brilliant patter. Jimmy was 90 odd when he died a couple of years ago, and he was super knowledgeable and on rugby and on livestock, and JJ's just down to earth. He's good crack, and just good folk, Yeah,
and Jimmy, as you said, his father was one of the first men to bring Charolais cattle into the country at Kersnow, and some fantastic cattle came out of Kersnow, and still do. Charolais cattle are still there. Be close on 50 years, they've still got them there, and probably somebody we should have a chat with him on my podcast another day. But yeah, a good fella, and a few about the Borders there. You've got that, and Derek, your own family there. Brian Redpath, I think, is your cousin. Brian is another great rugby player.
He is my cousin, yeah, scrum half for Scotland. I don't see that much of Brian. That was up at the Fiji game in at the autumn tests there, and actually met up with Brian because Cam, his son, was playing. So we had a wee bit of a family reunion at that, and it was good to see him. I'm a bit of a glitch in the family though, because I would be by a long way the worst rugby player in our family. My brother played, and my cousins all played, and when I went to college, the lecturer that used to run the Oakridge rugby team, his eyes lit up when he had a Redpath in his team. And then we had the first week's training, and I couldn't catch the cold, and it was kind of embarrassing, to be honest. But I was pretty crap, but I could wipe out a kind of couple of second rows in one move, but catching the ball, I was bloody useless.
Yes, your talents are not wasted though, Derek. Every rugby team needs a good kitty man.
Yeah, I could do that.
And you mentioned Cameron Redpath, and those guys listen overseas probably haven't a clue what rugby is, but Cameron Redpath is up and coming fly half, I think, for Scotland, and he's in the team there along with young Hastings and 1 or 2, and it's nice to see the youngsters, second generation, coming through back into the professional sport, isn't it?
Aye, definitely. Like it's amazing to see all these youngsters that their dads played together for Scotland, and it's amazing how many of them are coming through at the next generation, and it makes it good to watch.
Andy, you mentioned there's a lot of farming connections with rugby union in Scotland, and in particular the Borders. I think on reflection, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, well, even if you go back to none of us can, but if you go way, way back through the sort of pre-World War, etc., much of the national teams, because it was an amateur sport, were made up of farmers, tradesmen, people who did physical jobs. And because they were physical jobs, they were great at training. Obviously, they were a step ahead of the rest of the guys. And I think through the amateur era, if you look at the Scotland team, I suppose running up to through the 80s and through the 90s, hell of a farmers in the squad at one level or another. And I think a lot of that was just down to, for a start, they had a foundation level of rugged natural fitness because of the work they were doing. I mean, they went to training anyway on a Tuesday or Thursday, whenever, for their club. They were a step ahead of the guys who were sitting on their backside in an office doing a clerking job all day, like an auctioneer, Andy. And I think because of that, they would. That sort of sets the tone for generations following them through, and you get this real sort of there's family representation, like the Redpaths, going right back through Borders rugby over the years. Elliott's another very popular name that went through Scottish rugby and the British Lions as well in the 60s and the 70s. Great Borders farmers. And it's just, I think that's what it comes down to, really. I think it's just their rugged fitness from doing a physical job just laid the foundations for that sport.
You got a Hoggy in your district as well, of course.
Well, yeah, we have at Birkenside, yeah. We've got, Carol Hogg that did the eulogy for Doddie on Monday, his family are from Beamerside. They're farming family as well in the Scottish Borders. Birkenside, sorry, yeah.
Andrew, there'll be not to be left out down there in the Dumfries and Galloway districts. A few rugby players come out of there. Is that a sport that you get involved in?
Yeah, I was involved in it when I was back in my young days before I started Young Farmers and drinking and all that other carry on. The rugby was quite I thoroughly enjoyed playing it. It was in Kinannon Academy. There was a very avid rugby fan teacher who was Mr. McCann, Colin McCann. And he managed to pull together a team, and we actually played very well eventually, and we done very well in the junior levels, under 15s, under 16s. Some of the boys that came up through the ranks were one of the most notable would be Alex Dunbar.
Oh yeah.
I remember holding a tackling bag for that boy, and I didn't want to do it very often. Alex, I played with Alex, and he went up through the ranks in Scotland. His family were farming just outside Johnston Bridge. And they moved to Tasmania, of all places, and they're farming. They're a dairy farm out there at the moment. But I think Alex is now retired and he's back. There's been a few back round about me, but I've not got as many years as the likes of Scott or that, so I can't really come back round and see who all I've played in.
But it's brilliant, not just in Scotland or in the Borders. I went to school in Luckton on the Herefordshire borders, just down there, and I was down for a reunion recently, and there's a lot of the old Lucktonians have done very well over the years, and come to my old school. I went back. I didn't play for the Old Lucks, but I played for the school. But I went back down there to a reunion just recently, and the likes of Richard Hall and these guys, the hop farmers and Will Chase and Johnny Price and all those guys, recognised names in amongst the potato industry nowadays, and they all came through that route as well. And it's just, I suppose what I'm saying really, it's very much over the years, or as Scotty said, going back the way the farmers were the backbone of what we now have as a professional rugby industry, and good for you, Doddie, and the rest of you guys that went before that.
I mean, even now, Andy, there's still, you look at club level. I mean, I don't know, I don't keep up with it just as much round about us at the moment, but Scotty maybe will. And at club level, the majority of players that you see in the first 15 are from a farming background, one way or another. Still, they might not be making it up to the big leagues, but they're still working at grassroots, and a lot of them still like to play just to keep themselves fit, and a lot of them, their fathers stop them playing eventually in case they get injured before lambing time or such like.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. You're absolutely right. And I mean, JJ being an exception, but I remember him saying as well, I mean, and a lot of the other guys, that you can't go away and play professional rugby because you've got a farm to run, and a lot of the guys would have been denied that chance of getting that national shirt because it was that or farming. Only if rugby players got paid the same as football players, and we'd get some diversification in farming there. Where you'd be encouraging your son to say, "Never mind coming here, lambing the sheep. Go and earn some money, and then you can come back and we can buy some more sheep." So that was something I wanted to move on to, and it's great to have a chat about rugby. One guy I probably should mention in the rugby, of course, is Henry Slade, who's one of our English golden boys there, and I think he's well related to Robin Slade, who's probably one of our great sheep golden boys as well in the sheep industry. Won just about everything. So boy down in Exeter there, but I'm just holding my own up there for the England side because we're the whipping boys for this World Cup coming up. And although we do at last actually have a coach who will have been in the job literally 9 months before we get to a World Cup, but hey ho.
Oh, he'll get there one way or another, surely.
Don't call me Shirley.
I was having a look when you were saying about it, Andy, just to see the list of current professionals or very well noted professionals actually that played professional rugby that are farmers, and I tell you, looking at the list, there's a lot of them are actually Irish, and that probably follows through a lot of stuff. I mean, the Irish boys are, a lot of them do come forward on that side. I mean, there's like Sean O'Brien, who's a farmer through in Carlo.
Yeah.
The whole rake.
I had a phone call one day, and it was from a guy. I had literally a phone rang, and I was driving in the car, and the phone rang, and it's like Rory Best phoned me up, and
he's one of
a great rugby player and a fantastic rugby player, but good farming outfit as well. And they breed Angus cattle, so you're right. There's a lot of them come through.
Yeah. I remember a Diamond interview. I watched it happening live. It was Sean O'Brien. He was European Player of the Year. He was doing an interview with Sonia O'Sullivan just after the European Cup final. And she said, Sean O'Brien, she goes, who would have thought this time last year, a new man in the Leinster pack, and she says, and here we are, 12 months down the line, you've won the European Cup and you're European Player of the Year. How does it feel? And he goes, this time last year I was cutting calves with my dad in the shed at back in Carlo, and there was people looking around him. He said, "What's he saying, Scotty?" And I said, he was castrating calves in a shed at home on the farm in Carlo." It was brilliant. It's just superb.
There's a notable English family though that you've missed off, Andy.
Uh-huh.
You had Ben, Nick, and Tom Youngs.
Oh, the Youngs, yeah.
The farming family from Norfolk.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Dusty hair. What do you call Julian White?
Yeah.
Funny you mentioned Dusty hair, Scott. I was when we started this kind of chat the other day about thinking about rugby players. I remember watching Dusty hair on whatever Country Vile was called before it was that rubbish.
Country Vile, it's now called.
Country Vile, and he was on it like they did a bit just before lambing time, and he had a whole lot of Suffolk cross yows, and Dusty Hare was a character. When he set up a kick, he was like a fart in the wind.
Used to practice kicking to one post. Is that right, on the farm? They used to say, and the one we probably should mention as well is your man that captained Scotland to win the last Grand Slam. Or did I mention the last Grand Slam? Maybe the Grand Slam before that in 1980. Come on,
David Soul.
That's the man.
David Soul was farming, or maybe he still is, up in Perthshire. He was a grain trader during the time that he was playing for Scotland. That's what he was doing for a living. I don't exactly know what he's doing now.
Well, he got into Angus cattle and bred some bloody good ones, to be fair. Then I think he kept them all in soon after. But yeah, he did well in the Angus breed.
Yeah, he got into Suffolks as well and built up a flock of Suffolks and then cashed them in as well. So there seems to be a pattern emerging, Andy.
So you mentioned about breeding Suffolks, and of course Suffolk's a great breed, Scotty, you're involved in. I was in Texels. I think I've got Rylands now. We've got Dick on here, Blackie breeder, and we've got Andrew breeding Hampshires, and we've all got a few sheep of our own. And I suppose I've got a bit of an issue really that we all say our breed is the best, and you think, well, they're the best for the right courses. The Texels, the Beltex, they all. And I know Robert Patterson, who was on the call with us last year, had done very well breeding Beltex crossed with Charolais and selling a Beltex Charolais crossed tups at Kelso for good money. And I kind of wondered really, why aren't we using more crossbred tups? I think Andrew, a Hampshire cross with a Suffolk would make a bloody good sire. And
I tell you, Andy, what I saw a very good cross was actually a Hampshire with a Beltex.
Huh?
Some of the best looking sheep I've ever seen, and I am not keen on Beltex at all, but they were phenomenal. Huge growthy sheep. I think it was Kevin McCarthy from Ireland. who took to Kelso, who took, I think it was half a dozen or so shearlings, and they were Beltex Cross Hampshires, and they were phenomenal.
Kevin, a great breeder. Kevin, a great breeder of both breeds, to be fair. But I mean, yes, I said,
definitely.
My father bred something called a Blue Tex, which was we had Blue Domains, and the last of the Blue Domains, when he brought the Beltex in, he banged the Beltex across the Blue Domains, and some of those Blue Tex tops were great. And the Blue Domain was guilty of not having an identity, I suppose, of sort of where it belonged in the world. And I suppose I'm just wondering, and I'm going to piss everybody off in the sheep industry by saying this, but is there a market there more for us turning out societies of Hamtex or Hambecks or whatever you'd call the Hampshire cross there, or the?
Well, I would, like, speaking to Kevin, obviously I'm not that long into the Hampshires, and we are going to grow it through time, but. Speaking to Kevin, there's a massive market for that Hampshire Cross Beltex. He's sold a huge number of them round about him, and even across here, which economically you wouldn't think would make sense. A crossbred tup coming across the water for the money that it would cost him and cost the buyer. But no, he says it's certainly a cross that a lot of people are looking at. Obviously, with the Beltex has been a very good finished lamb, but taking their time to get to that finishing stage, and the Hampshire has been very well renowned for being fast finishing. It seems to be quite a good cross. I can't say. I mean, I don't know. Derek and Scott maybe say have different ideas on it, but
I've got Derek and Scott. Derek and Scott on mute at the moment until we finish this conversation.
That's a better idea.
Probably a good idea.
I always found when we were. When I was auctioneering, there would be the odd cross tup, or there would be the odd cross bull would come through, and I mean it's obviously going to take time to get the right genetics through it and get it correct. But at the time, you would find that you would get the worst of both crosses coming through in the progeny. So obviously, saying like the Hampshires are very fast growing, but they're quite fine boned and they're very woolly. And the Beltex are quite slow growing but very shapy. You would end up with a slow growing woolly sheep lamb at the end of it, and you think, what the fuck, I've just spent all this money here at Kelso for this fancy Hampshire Cross Beltex, and I've got the worst of both worlds.
It's a great line, isn't it? To say, I'll bring these guys in a second, but the American guys will say the same thing originally when they started by selling Charolais Cross Simmental, Cross whatever it is, bulls as hybrids, and then as the years went on, they got all the figures together to go with those till they were getting the best out of every one of those breeds and a hybrid, or the stabilizers and all these things. And it's a common conversation that I wind up everybody up on this podcast with, but in the cattle world. But it's the breeds, maybe the pedigree breeds, have lost a bit of their identity in the US by the fact that they have gone down this hybrid route, to the fact that the pedigree breed's purpose is only really to feed the hybrids to make the cross animals that they need. And I just wonder, and we've hung on, and we are hanging on to our pedigree breeds in the UK and our traditions and what have you, whether we in 20 years down the line, if we're all sitting there on the same conversation, and help us if we are, and with our Zimmer frames, we might be seeing more. I
don't think I could carry you that long, Andy.
We might see more crossbred rams being used within the industry if we got a bit more data now in the days when we got more technical achievements to do that. I'll throw it back to you, Andrew, before I let these guys dive in.
No, I think it's the same. If you look, I mean, obviously, a lot of your listeners won't be into the sort of dairy industry, but looking into the dairy side of things, genomics is becoming a very big thing. And I think if the beef industry is to move to that next stage, I mean, with the crossbreds and hybrids, I certainly think that they're going to have to start looking at the genomic side of it and actually getting you're not necessarily going to have the best looking beast there, but the best genetic beast that's going to give you what you want, which is at the end of the day, which is the commercial side of it, which is your length, your depth, your size, your shape, everything that's going to give you your main cuts. And I think that's something that's definitely going to have to be looked at. And I mean, I know in the Hampshires they're starting to do they're doing DNA testing, but they're obviously looking at starting this sort of genomic register within it. And I think that's, if this hybrid cross is going to start having any sort of viability, it's going to have to start working with these
figures.
Maybe not necessarily the best looking sheep, but the figure side of it. I mean, I know Signet are sort of pushing it forward at the moment, and there's arguments to be made about the figure side of it with them, but until the figures and everyone's sort of working with figures, until they start to get to the numbers, I mean, you look at percentages in the catalogue of their accuracy. Yeah. I mean, to show something with figures, no matter how high or low that they are, with a percentage rate of less than 90%, I mean, how are you meant, of an accuracy, how are you meant to follow that? And it's not going to get any better until either everyone does it or everyone stops it. And the argument can be made for a lot of different things within this, but I mean, for it to be right, I mean, there has to be a very high genetic bank built before they start pushing a lot of this stuff. You know yourself, and a lot of the people listening will know, it's having a good sheep standing in front of you is the main thing at the moment. The genetically best sheep probably isn't the best looking at the moment, and that will change once they start to use a few more around, Andy. I mean,
I've pissed off I'm Scott Brown and Derek Redpath. Welcome to the podcast.
Keep them back. Let them go.
Well, what you said though at the start, Andy, about commercial traits, that's where your hobby breeds end up, because they forget the commercial traits, and every breed should remember that. Is if you've got the commercial traits, you've got something that's viable and useful. But Andrew touched on there, like the crossbreds, the problem with them is consistency, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's you don't get the consistency with them. But if you could get the good bits from both, then, you know, we all know that hybrid vigour, it doesn't matter whether it's fertility, growth, flesh, everything really, hybrid vigour generally helps them all. So, but for generations, farmers have been trying it and making some progress, but there's a reason why the purebreds are there too.
There is the Aberfeld. I mean, I did an interview with a guy that runs the Aberfeld sheep, who's now won Sheep Farm of the Year, I think, for them. And there are these other breeds. And yes, you're right. Consistency is the key. What do you say, Scott?
Well, I think the sheep industry is going to change beyond belief in the next 5 years. It has to, because we're going to have to.
Go.
People are going to have to be able to produce lambs off a low-cost production system on grass where possible. But apart from anything else, we've got a couple of obstacles in the way, which we'll come to later on, which is QMS and the grading system. It's very much the tail wagging the dog. It's not serving us well at all. We're getting, in the sheep industry at the moment, we're getting paid for producing kilos of lamb mince, because there's no emphasis being placed at all on a repeatable eating experience. If we're looking to grow the lamb consumption in the UK, we're not going to be able to do it on selling E-grade carcasses, I'm afraid. And coming back to what Goldie was proposing, or his experiences with that Hampshire Beltex, I can totally see, and Goldie, why that would be a success. You only have to, if there's anybody listening and they want to go on YouTube after this, if you please go into YouTube and type in Lamb Pro Australia. Anybody who's progressive in the sheep industry in the UK should take a real good look at that and take on board what that guy's doing. He sells 850 rams a year, and his focus is purely on intramuscular fat, and he's getting a 25% increase in return on his lambs over the next best producers in Australia with his lambs, because he's getting repeat business for people buying rams with high intramuscular fat. Now, to give you a benchmark on where we're at in the UK with that, obviously I did a bit of work on that myself when I was CT scanning my Suffolks. We had the second highest intramuscular fat sheep in the UK of all breeds 2 years ago, with an intramuscular fat of 4.5%. The next best was, I think, 4.7 or 4.8. The fellow who has Lamb Pro Australia is producing Hampshire Down rams with an intramuscular fat percentage of 7%. That's average. That's not his top, that's average. And when you look at the cross-section of these chops that he produces, and he was cooking on one particular occasion, it's just like looking at a Wagyu chop in a lamb shape. Phenomenal. And I mean, that's what we need to do in the UK to be able to actually grow the lamb consumption in the UK and make it a repeatable experience, and to avoid it and stop it from becoming a commodity, because that's a race to the bottom, especially when we're now so vulnerable in the global market.
So, Scott, sorry to interrupt you, but my mouth's watering at the thought of this Wagyu lamb chop. But how do you convince the housewives in the UK to buy a chop that's 7 or 8% fat intramuscular on top of the fat that's on the back.
I hear what you're saying, the pair. If you can I just wind that back a little bit and just explain to, let's say we've got some listeners on here who maybe aren't sheep producers or might be American, or from different ideals. So we're saying intramuscular fat. So we are talking fat within the eye muscle rather than obviously fat around the outside. So we want to cut down we've worked for years and years cutting the fat around the outside of the lamb chop, and now we're talking about putting fat within the lamb chop, which is something that Suffolk's always prided itself on. So is that what you're talking, Scott? Yeah?
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you're doing CT scans, you can get a CT scan of the L3, which is looking straight at the chop. The only other way you can get that image is by killing the animal and hanging it up. But they're able to make really accurate, and it's highly heritable. I mean, it's as heritable as daily live weight gain or eye muscle size or fat is on an animal. So it's a highly heritable trait, and something that would, if you selected for it, would come through very quickly. And yeah, Derek, we're talking about intramuscular fat. So that's the white spots of fat peppered through the eye muscle of the chop, as opposed to a fat rind on the top of which is on the outside of the animal, which is something different. And I think to answer your question as to how do we get a white wife to embrace buying that or going looking for that lamb, I think to start off with, that's very much going to be a privileged eating experience, I think, to start with, because for a start, there's not going to be enough of them in the country. Because when I've explored this on behalf of the Suffolk Sheep Society, when I was chairman of the commercial committee, I spoke to a major retailer, and he said, "I hear you, and it was something worthwhile getting into. But where are you on the scale of rams within the country that are CT scanned with levels of 4.5% and above?" And I said, "Well, there's 450 ram lambs scanned in total in the UK." Across 7 different breeds, and even within my own top 10 lambs, there's only about 2 lambs that have an intramuscular fat reading of above 4. So we are nowhere near it, but we need to start embracing with the terminal sire breed, certainly, this level of technology to take. If QMS are, I hate harping back to QMS, but if they're serious about promoting PGI protected status Scottish lamb, they're going to have to do it on how it eats selling the view. Because selling the view is not good enough. You need to be able, because it's no different to anybody else's lamb. They have to be able to promote the fact that because it's got this intramuscular fat through it. And I know there'll be a lot of Beltex breeders and continental sheep breeders listening to this and very good. You're looking after yourself. I don't have Suffolk sheep anymore, but I am very precious about our meat industries in the UK, in Scotland in particular. And I want to be able to make sure that we still have a sheep industry going forward in generations to come as a result of decisions that we make in the next 2 or 3 years.
Scotty, if you stop there, that's fantastic. That's an insight you've got into that there, and something I didn't know and our listeners probably don't know. I'd like to think there'd be a Ryland there that might be introduced into that hybrid when we start putting that together, as well as a Hampshire. But that's me paddling my own canoe there. But as you said, if we are going to go down that route, then it's almost about breeding an animal that is capable of producing that intramuscular fat at the level that you're talking about, and that probably isn't one single pedigree animal. That's probably a crossbred or a hybrid, which is kind of where I started this conversation. Derek, what do you think?
It goes back to whatever suits your system, doesn't it? And figures and stuff, to be fair, I'm not that hot on figures, but working mostly with a maternal breed, we have a few Suffolks too, but the black is a maternal breed, and trying to get figures for maternal breeds is much, much harder. And I think in some of the breeding programmes and some of the new breeds that have been brought in, crossbred breeds, there's maybe not enough work done on the maternal side of it. But it depends what suits your system, doesn't it? Okay.
Have I thrown enough of a hand grenade in here? I've certainly rattled everybody's cage here. And is there something else we can finish this off with, or are we deciding that the crossbred hybrid ram it probably doesn't have a future yet, or are we deciding that we probably need to make one?
I think, Andy, as well, just a final note on that discussion about crossbreeding, to sustain the future of purebreds. I think the cattle industry, the beef industry, has probably done it for us already in the UK. You just have to look at native breeds like the Angus and the Shorthorn. Just look at how opening the herd book to crossbreeding, I suppose, of those breeds, so they could adapt and shape themselves to take on the new markets and challenges that lie ahead, and see where they are now. And they've really cemented themselves in the last 4 or 5 years as being a product that's got credibility and has great attributes people want, and the people want to use them for that reason.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I hear exactly what you're saying. I totally agree with you. We're all singing off the same page. But when you listen to Americans and some of my previous podcasts, and they sit there and there'll be guys, hello, you guys in the US and Canada and wherever in the world. You hear them sitting there going, "You guys are nuts!" You know, we had all these traditional breeds that, okay, and they might have been your traditional breeds, but we took them, or our traditional breeds, and they took them, depending which way you're listening. And then we made them into something that we know is a hybrid product that actually will take the best out of all these breeds and turn it into one animal or two or three animals which suit our environment, and different environments, as Derek said, suit different people, which is quite right. But I just think in the sheep industry it's a lot easier to do because we've got a much shorter gestation, and you get two lambs instead of one calf, so you're doubling. I mean, we all know that you have a flock of sheep. Next thing you know, we got 100 of the bloody things, you can't get rid of them, and it's so it'd be much easier to genetically develop something in the way of I would have thought something in the way of a hybrid ram, which, let's say we take a Texel and a Suffolk, two top marketing sheep in the country, or the Beltex might be close. Texel and a Suffolk and a Ryland and a Hampshire or whatever, and stick those together and say, right, we're going to make this product which is X or Y, and that will suit the market that we need for making extra intramuscular or making extra wool or extra weight or whatever it is. It should be fairly easy for somebody to do that, and nobody's ever done it, and I wonder why. And as Derek said, maybe that just you just end up being the worst of everything.
I think it's a thing that grates on my nerves quite a lot is getting preached to about how things work in New Zealand and how things work in America and how things work in Canada. Mm-hmm. And there's all these systems, there's always something in them that you can take from and you can use at home. But what works in New Zealand won't necessarily work in our climate here. And that some of those things piss me off. But you get, no doubt, there's a lot of the things that they do that you can learn from and take bits out of each system. But in the UK, and especially in Scotland, we have such a diversity of climate and conditions and everything, and it makes it a bit more interesting. But it makes it difficult. But it's now a global industry, so it's brilliant that we can pick bits from everywhere and put them together to improve our system. But not everything that works. It's trial and error, isn't it? Not everything that works there works here. Yeah, every breed has its place, and there's no doubt, like hybrid vigour definitely helps if your system can work within that. And we've seen it over the last 15, 20 years. It started with people keeping Texel crosses and tucking them with a Suffolk, and it's grown arms and legs since then. And there are a much bigger variety of crosses. But one thing that you see is that has a problem in itself, because to try and get consistency for the housewife, there are a huge range of crosses and breeds. And you go to the market any day of the week and you struggle to find, the buyers are trying to buy consistency for their customers. So to try and find hundreds of lambs to suit one specific job, it's very tricky. And whereas I remember Robert McNee went to New Zealand and on a scholarship, and he gave a presentation, and he showed you in an abattoir in New Zealand and the lambs coming down the line, and there was hundreds of them like peas in a pod. Mm-hmm. And that's where we lack that consistency in this country, because we have such a diverse sheep industry and a diverse climate and circumstances to breed these sheep. It's consistency that's the problem. And the more crosses you chuck in, the less consistency you're going to get.
And just moving on to changing subject there, I want to talk a little bit about how farmers are starting to make their living out with the farming industry, or within the farming industry, but out with the commercial side of it by diversification into various things. And we do hear turkeys and various things for Christmas, people selling hay for rabbits and what have you, but the main one seems to be diversification into...
Are we back to Belting sheep again?
The main one seems to be diversification into property, or not so much property, but wooden properties, old barns, bits of sheds, anything round about the building. You can take somebody in and tell them it's a shepherd's hut, and they can sit in there and see some sheep in the district and believe they're having a bit of farming. And I'm not quite sure how the law gets around the fact that you can have a shepherd's hut, as they used to have on the White Hills of South England, where the shepherd's hut would be on wheels and it would move to a different part of the chalk each day. And nowadays they have a shepherd's hut and you can stick somebody in there and it's got a bed in one corner and a stove in the other corner and maybe a fridge, and people go there and enjoy a holiday. And fucks, that could be torture as far as I'm concerned, but it seems to be where everybody wants to go. So the shepherd's hut's becoming a thing there in Derrick on the hills of the borders where you are.
Derek's sitting in wood just now, Andy.
He's in wood just now.
Yeah, but another log in that fire, for God's sake.
It's only because you chucked it. You got to have the paraffin fire in the corner as well. You've not been chucked out of the shepherd's hut again already. That's slamming time, surely. Not till May.
That's the doghouse.
I've been chucked out the living room because an interest in diversification. There are not many shepherd's huts around about here. There's one or two, but not very many. But we have a neighbour who migrated from the north of England a few years ago, and she's got alpacas. But she's got a brilliant attitude, and she's really good with the general public. Fair play to her. And she bought that place, and they've got all sorts of kind of wigwams and teepees and kind of places to stay, and folk come on their holidays. And at the minute, she's doing the Santa Express with these alpacas, and that she does really, really well. She's hell of a busy. She's got a brilliant attitude to it. Her husband's in the army. He's home quite a lot. They do a lot of the work themselves, and they'll have a really good going business on the back of these alpacas and tourism. And she's not frightened to have a go and get folk in, but it doesn't matter what they're doing as long as they're spending. I'm not ridiculing
the diversification. If it sounded like I was doing, everybody in the farming industry has a right to has a nous, and a lot of this I have to say, and we have four men on here going to get our ass kicked by saying that, but a lot of it comes from the female side of the business, where there's something else we can do out with farming as a farmer's wife, and we've seen some of this on this farming life and various things, but. Alpacas wouldn't be an easy one, Derek, because their livestock isn't. If you're going to take them on, they're not going to earn their keep apart from keeping looking after the general public, or are they? Maybe is there the wool and the whatever else they do? Is it just a tourist attraction?
It's more or less just a tourist attraction. Lynn makes
a bit like Rylands, really.
Cool. Aye, just exactly, but taller. The wool's quite fine and quite. She's been doing a lot, mixing it with different things and selling it, and I think Lynn's got quite a good business sense, so she would sell everything, including her spit, if she could get away with it. So it's a money making business, but it's all based on tourism and getting people to come and spend their cash in a fairly remote area. And she does well.
That is the difference, isn't it? It's easy for these farmers down the south to say, well, I'm going to go some pumpkins or what have you, but they've got a footfall going past their door. I mean, it's difficult when you're in the Cairngorms and you see 3 cars a week going past your road and you're not going to get the people in, but then it becomes an online thing, I suppose. But there is a lot of diversification into it, isn't it? And I'll go back to, I suppose, to the shepherd's huts and the fact you can bring these people onto your farm. And if you're in the business of tourism, then bringing the people onto the farm is great. But if you're in the business of farming, which you guys had dyed in the wool farmers. I've been out the farming industry for a generation. You dyed in the wool farmers that are bringing these guys onto your farm and bringing people onto your farm and having them in there and then walking around and looking at your stock and asking ridiculous questions and not knowing where their food is coming from. It's an education, but it's also a bit of a bloody imposition, isn't it? To bring the tourists in onto your farm, no matter how much money they bring, it's going to hurt you day to day.
There's a bit along the road from us, quite a bit along the road from us at Gatehouse of Fleet. It's Lagan or Gigi's Yard for the wedding venues, and it is literally, we've been there. I think we've been twice and stayed in their pods that they call them. I think there are 20 of them now. They used to do a sort of outdoor events thing. They'd have sort of a flying fox and a few other different things. But it's diversification at its best. I mean, it's on the side of a hill that you couldn't stick a blackie on. There would be, it's less than 10 acres of land that it's unforageable. You couldn't do anything with it. And they've stuck 20 pods in it. They've got a restaurant, and it's past Gatehouse of Fleet on the way to Stranraer. And it's unbelievable what they've done in there. And it is literally, you couldn't do anything else with this land. And they've stuck 20 pods on it, with some with hot tubs, bits and pieces. And it's amazing. It's land that you couldn't produce enough money out it to please any bank manager. You might have heard it, Derek. You might have been at a few weddings at GT's Yard. But it's ridiculous what they've done with that place. There's a couple caravan parks round about it in that area that are doing quite well, but it's unbelievable what you would do. Like, it's a bit of wasteland.
But basically, people will come along, and if they've got a view, it's about a view, isn't it? Same with Derek, you've got a view of the snowy hill, the snowy hills across the way or whatever it is, but the sea will attract that, especially where you are. And the fact that it's raining all day, you need to make sure that, not every day, but pretty much most of them, you make sure that you're undercover and they can see that. But I mean, 20 pods, I wouldn't want to be there. I want one pod, and then the nearest pod being another bloody 100 miles away.
You wouldn't know they were there, Andy. Yeah. In all honesty, you wouldn't know. It's that steep a bit of land. You wouldn't know the other pods were there. Yeah. It's unbelievable, and it's the same with anything. It's location program, location, and it's where you are.
But yeah, Scotty, the same as a small farmer yourself. Diversification, selling your own Highland beef and what have you, and earning a living mainly out with your own farm. There are a lot of people that you'll come across who make their living in different ways in agriculture, and yes, bringing the public in is everything is about bringing the public in and bringing it in the right way and educating them in rather than ripping them off.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. There's some people have either got a farm park, if they're by the coast and it's low enough rainfall, they can have a farm park with a shop attached to it. These two things usually go hand in hand. My brother Gav, he's just about to install. Gavin's farm is just under 300 acres, but he's right beside the main road, and he's about to put in 8 pods. And people can also kind of experience, seeing lambs at lambing time and stuff like that in the lambing shed, and they've got Highland cattle on the farm as well, so they could probably go up and comb a calf or something like that. When we're looking at people who can diversify, the people for me that I'd be most impressed by, with the minimum outlay and the maximum return, are those who've turned to social media and they've got subscribers following what they're doing. Like the Hoof GP is a great example. That Graham Parker, the Hoof GP, he's made a phenomenal amount of money off of doing a bit of hoof trimming, but also the followers he now has and subscribers on social media have just taken his income to another level. And there was a farm during COVID. There was a farm down south somewhere where they had goats, and they were live streaming the goats, and you could name a goat and follow the goat that day, and they were bringing in a phenomenal amount of money on a weekly basis. Now, I don't know what the longevity is like on those situations, but to be honest, if you've not laid the cash out, it doesn't matter. If you get a big return on it over a short period of time and it goes flat as a skitter, well, it's no hard deal really, because you've had your buck out of it. But there's things people are doing. I think social media is probably the way to go in the short term. There's so much uncertainty in farming at the moment with what's going to happen with regards to carbon credits. A lot of estates taking back farms where they can. The amount of forestry that's going in. It's very difficult to know what farmers are going to be allowed to do by their landowners if they're tenant farmers in particular. So things like social media is probably quite a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can, but it's about bringing the non-farming people into the business. Every time we talk about diversification, the whole description of diversification is about bringing people out with farming into the farming industry and taking some money off them directly, rather than letting the people who actually benefit from the farming industry, i.e. the general public, taking it, getting that through a supermarket. So we're all trying out to cut out the middleman. And Andrew, you'd mentioned to me a while ago, and we've seen a little bit of this on This Farming Life, where farmers now, or dairy farmers now, starting to sell their milk directly to the public, and I think that's another great shot.
Yeah, well, it's an opportunity that I think you've obviously seen within France that there's a lot of people starting to look at local and how things are produced and where they're produced. There's far more of that in the UK now than there's ever been.
Yep.
People want to know where their meats came from. They want to know where their milk has came from. And if that means travelling 5 minutes down the road to go to their local farm to take a reusable bottle of milk back home to their family to do for 2 or 3 days, and they're more than happy to do it. And I mean, round about me at the moment, obviously I'm in sort of the milk capital of Scotland. You can just about turn every corner and there's a milk vending machine, and you can see where the capital is within that industry. There's huge opportunities because people are. If you look at the news now, I mean, everyone, you can't avoid it. Reusable. They want to get rid of plastics. They want to know where things are coming from, and the locality of everything at the moment. Everything's there. People are producing the goods, whether it's meat, whether it's milk, whether it's cheese, anything. If folk want to go and get it, they'll go and get it, and they are doing that now.
Yeah, and it started with the farm shop, didn't it? I have a farm shop down the road from us, Ardross Farm Shop in Fife. Hello, Ardross, if you're listening. Give you another plug, but they just won our Farm Shop of the Year. They won Diversification Farm of the Year for Scotland, and they're just down the road in St Monos, just in here in Fife. And I will admit, if they're listening, they probably won't like this, but I'll go down there to buy my sprouts tomorrow, and they'll be 3 times the price. They'll be the sprouts I'd buy in Morrison's or anywhere else. And you go in, and there'll be a queue down the door, and there'll be the most expensive cars you've ever seen in Scotland in their car park. And they've managed to draw that together and add a premium onto their product. But good luck to them. And it's not just about taking the money off the general public, but it's about asking them to pay the prices that they would pay in the supermarket and more for a better product, and taking more profit out of it. So I think that's something that's growing and growing. But the whole diversification thing is growing, and there's different areas of it. As I went back to the huts and the people living in it. And there are guys down in the south and in Scotland, I think, as well, that got into the pumpkin market. And basically, the whole pumpkin market is set up for 1 day a year, for 2 or 3 weeks before. A guy down in Staffordshire, I remember saying he'd got 70,000 tickets booked in before, from starting in March. Wow. People booked in to come there and walk into his pumpkin patch and pick their pumpkins and take them at home. And I don't know what he charged, but I wouldn't imagine they wouldn't be cheap. And I do know there's a guy in Fife down the road there that had a pumpkin patch, and he ran out of pumpkins, and he was sending his wife down with a pickup down to Sainsbury's and buying every supermarket ran in, buying as many pumpkins as they could for £1 and bringing them back to their patch and selling them for £5. You can't deny that sometimes people are stupid, but if they're getting involved and we're getting the consumer, i.e. the general public, onto the farms to take some of our products at a premium price, or premium products at a premium price, maybe. Well,
I've spotted a gap in the market. So next year, the last week of October, I'm taking the bedding machine down to Holyrood, and I'm going to bed the best part of Holyrood, because it's full of pumpkins. And I think there'll be queued. Folk will be queued down the roads wanting them.
And they'll be the biggest pumpkins in the world, because they're fed with the biggest amount of bullshit you've ever heard as well.
Clip that, for Christ's sake, make sure and clip it.
But I mean, let's face it, we've all been asked, or me not particularly because I don't have the farm, but you guys must have been asked, or somebody near you being asked to be on This Farming Life. And I think This Farming Life, fantastic programme, and hello This Farming Life if you're watching, listening, that they've taken small farms, big farms, lots of farms, diversification farms, some of them not really farms, and they've brought them into people's front rooms and right into their armchairs. And I think that's been a fantastic show and fantastic series that they've done that. And I know one or two people, we've all known one or two people who've been in there, and the camera's been right in their face, and on days when it's not been good, they're pretty pissed off, or told them to piss off. But I think the series has been pretty good, and we're all looking forward to, you guys probably don't know this, or maybe you do all know this, that the young Beaches are on the case for the next one coming up there, and those boys will be seriously entertaining. And also, I mentioned just now, or I snipped at that Cammy Wilson with the sheep game as well, bringing stuff into people's faces, people's.
No, he's been flying the flag with Landward, and he's phenomenal. He's got a great way about him. If you consider not that long ago, he was working with the police and not really that seriously involved with the farming industry. And what he's done for farming in the last 5 years is unbelievable.
He's agreed to come on the podcast. I've got him on one of the podcasts shortly. We'll have a chat to him, and I'm sure he'll make a few of us laugh. So diversification. Anything else anybody's doing locally? Diversification that I can chuck in here. Anybody had to think about that now? No.
I was just thinking, Andy, when you were talking about bringing public onto the farm and stuff, and interesting to hear what you guys think. But these guys, the likes of Cammy and Gareth Wynne-Jones, another example. Yeah. He puts a lot on social media. Social media is a big part of every industry. If you're going to diversify, you need social media. But is it not quite daunting that you're setting yourself up for a barrage of abuse, because the keyboard warriors that are like anti-farming use every opportunity they can to try and down what a great industry we've got? And so is it not daunting to get involved in these kind of things? Cammy puts it over really well, and he has an answer for everything, but he must get some flack.
You all got an answer to that one, and the answer is basically that you've got to take that flack. You have to, if you're going to interact with the public. And this is the difference, I suppose, with maybe other countries, but as an industry, we have to stand up to say this is exactly where we stand with our product, and there will be people out there who stand against that product, and we have to be the ones who take the flak on that, who have the counter answers, and have to, and it will become a bigger and bigger part of our industry, of which I've spoken to a lot of guys on this podcast, where people are now running bull sales online and sheep sales online, and they can say what they say, and you've got to either delete them. But yeah, you're right. It is a problem that we'd have to do if we as an industry marketed our product directly every day of the week without the supermarkets who take most of our middle profit, as we all know. Then we've got to learn to deal with that. So I think social media, it has its massive advantages, but a lot of people don't realise the disadvantages that social or the disparity that social media is causing, and that might cause us into a civil war in a few years' time. I'm sorry that's gone off the track there. Scott, I'll let you get back in, because I'm sitting and waiting to say something.
Well, as farmers and producers in the UK, we should have no reservations whatsoever about standing and shouting from the rooftops about what we do in agriculture in the UK, whether it's in whatever sector you're involved in, livestock, arable, whatever. We are punching well above our weight. Welfare's the best in the world. And we're not, like anybody else, we're not beyond reproach. We're accountable for what we do, but we can celebrate what we do because we're bloody good at it. And everybody buys into the concept that if you look after animals, you look after your farm, it looks after you. And we should be very proud of what we can talk about in the UK, because we'll have our critics, but that's ill-informed people who really, in many cases, don't know what they're talking about. And so many people get on the bandwagon and talk about, red meat production is a massive contributor to climate change. Well, as misleading as that documentary was on BBC, remember a couple of years ago, where they were flying over the Amazon and looking at feedlots in the USA, had absolutely no bearing whatsoever, even remotely, to do with what we do in Scotland or the rest of the UK, where we're actually part of the solution to climate change rather than part of the pollution, because we can bring so much to the table in what we do here, and we've got a lot to be really, really proud of in terms of what we've achieved and what we're doing.
The scariest thing, Andy, is the buying habits of the UK. If you went into a supermarket at the end of October, beginning of November, you would find the Halloween shelves would be completely empty, but the red meat, the milk, any of the dairy stuff would be completely full. Yeah. Folk are quite happy to go and buy shit and spend Yeah, it's right. You know what I mean, Scott?
Yeah, I do.
Change the name of this group to Pumpkin Growers United, please.
They'll go and spend. They'll go and spend watching. We're currently in a recession. I don't care what the government says or what they say. We are in a recession. There's an issue with money, but people are quite happy to spend their money on absolute crap and starve to death. And that's the sad truth of it.
I was at a gathering recently, and I was talking to somebody who's well connected in the meat sector, and I was quoting that in 2008, following the recession, I was at a QMS seminar that Stuart Ashworth had given, and he was very good. He was talking about following the recession that there was a mass exodus towards scratch cooking. So whoever the person, not housewife, but whoever the person who cooks and buys in the house was going back to scratch cooking. They were buying pound of mince, just as Andy says, pound of mince, vegetables, making stew, making everything from scratch, because getting more bang for the buck, more protein for the buck. And I thought, I was actually thinking to myself, following obviously COVID, because there was a little bit of a leg up, if you like, in the consumption of locally produced food. And then I thought, when now that we're obviously going back into recession, and obviously inflation is through the roof, we're now going to see people go back to scratch cooking. And I said to this person, is that what's happening again? And they said, no, it's absolutely not what's happening. And I said, why? And they said, that was in 2008. We're now in 2022, 14 years further on. That skill base, you've got another generation of people coming through. That skill base is diminished massively. And I said, it can have. It's only been 14 years. And they said, no, it has. And people are now used to, as Goldie says, going to the supermarket, buying a ready-made meal. It's all perting meals now in the microwave, and that's what they're eating. And I think until food gets back to, if it ever does, I hope it doesn't, but if food gets back to being 40% of your salary goes on food, and it's currently about 16% of your salary goes on food, people are really not still going to get it. They're going to value having Sky Telly and the top of the range mobile phone way and an iPad way before they do what's in the fridge.
Well, I think on that cheery note, that about wraps things up for this evening's Christmas podcast. I've absolutely had a ball there chatting with you guys. There's a lot of this stuff's going to go on the cutting room floor tomorrow morning when this is edited out. But thank you to all you listeners out there listening to Top Lines and Tails. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and thank you for staying with me through now 109 episodes. And particular thank you this week goes to my three guests there, to Andrew Goldie. Thanks. Cheers, Andrew. Keep up with the brand.
Yeah, good night everyone. Thanks for having me on, Andy. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And to my good friend Derek there, hope the snow holds off and you get yourself a great Christmas. And finally to Scott Brown there, cheers Scotty, that's been a blast.
Cheers Scotty.
Cheers Andy.
And we'll see you three guys at the Royal Highland Show, if not before, and see everybody else back on this podcast again next week. And once again, a happy Christmas, everyone. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you again and a happy Christmas to our sponsors, Harbro. I hope you guys have a good time, and we'll catch you all again shortly. Thank you again.